Hello and welcome to Take 2 of the April Title I Coordinators webinar. If you were able to join us for the live broadcast of this webinar, I again apologize. I had a barking dog in the background, so I have re-recorded the webinar to eliminate that background noise. I will also be summarizing the questions that we received during the webinar during this recording. My name is Erin Sudduth, and I'm the branch manager for the Title I Part A Support and Improvement branch here at the Kentucky Department of Education. If you have any questions or comments about the content of today's webinar, you can send those to me via email at erin.sudduth@education.ky.gov. And of course, we will be recording this and posting it on our Title I Documents and Resources webpage. If you weren't able to attend the March webinar, be sure to check out that recording available on the Documents and Resources webpage. In addition to our usual timely reminders and announcements, Robin Morley from KDE's Office of Finance Operations joined us to share an announcement about the ARP liquidation extension. We talked about evaluating the implementation and effectiveness of Title I school-wide program plans, that's the same thing as the CSIP, and sharing information with principals of Title I schools. And on that note, today's webinar is definitely something that you are going to want to share with the principals of those Title I schools. Our agenda for today, we have our usual announcements and reminders about monthly spend down and what was in the April Title I newsletter. And then our main focus is going to include a summary of parent and family engagement policy and compact requirements, some common compliance issues surrounding those policies and compacts, and all of that is then going to lead to the introduction of some new resources that are going to be available from KDE. Want to let everyone know that we're having a virtual statewide federal programs training provided by the Brewman Group. If you're not familiar with the Brewman Group, they are formerly known as Brustein and Manasevit, and this is a nationally recognized legal firm known for its federal grant management and education, regulatory, and legislative practices. This is at no cost to districts, and you can attend on either June 3rd or June 4th. It is the same content offered both days, so you do not need to attend both of those. The training is going to highlight upcoming changes to uniform grant guidance, information about ESSER funding, fiscal requirements, etc. We believe that this training will benefit district staff who are responsible for the oversight and administration of any federal education program, not just Title I Part A, as well as compliance with legal requirements. We strongly encourage the district superintendent, finance officer, and federal programs coordinator to attend. So in order to register for this virtual training, we have a link to the online registration form in the PowerPoint. As always, we're just going to take a quick look at our timeline for ensuring that you meet the requirement to obligate at least 85% of 310K funds by September 30th. Now, I say every time we look at this, remember these percentages are not required by ESSA. This is just me dividing 85% by the 15 months that you have to obligate those funds and arriving at approximately 5.5% being obligated each month. So by the end of April, roughly 56% should be spent or encumbered. Now, if you are significantly below that point, please meet with your finance officer to ensure that you are still on track to meet the carryover requirement by September 30th of 2024. For example, we know that salaries cannot be encumbered. So for those of you paying for a lot of staff, you may be below that 56 percentage mark at this time. But if you sit down with your finance officer, you may be able to project the expenses for staff between now and September and go ahead and confirm that you're not going to need a carryover waiver. Now, it's okay if you've spent or obligated more than what's on the table, but again, be sure to take action if the amount that you've spent or obligated is significantly less than this percentage. So if that's the case, you might consider increasing your monitoring of expenditures, have more conversations with your finance officer, increase the number of meetings with principals regarding timely spending, etc. Of course, Project 310K is not the only Title I project that is currently open. We've looked at this table during some of our more recent webinars, and we know that there are currently 3 open Title I Part A projects. We have 310I, 310J, and 310K. Remember that KDE received an extension for the 310I funds. So on this table, I've included their original deadlines so you can see that they do align with J and K, but I've just put some strike through text as a reference. So the 2024 deadlines that you want to keep on your radar are, first up is June 30th, just 2 months away. This is the deadline to have all 310I funds obligated. The next deadline is August 30th. This is when the final federal cash request for those 310I funds is due. September 30th, we've actually got two things on the table here. First up is the deadline to have all 310J funds obligated, and the deadline to have at least 85% of 310K funds obligated. And then the last deadline for 2024 is November 15th, and that's the last day that you can submit those federal cash requests for 310J funds. So again, be sure that you are checking in with your finance officer and making sure that you are on track to meet all of these various deadlines. If you haven't read the April Title I newsletter, it is posted on our Documents and Resources webpage, and we leave all of those posted for 1 year. This month's webinar included a reminder about the final fiscal year 2024 allocations being available in GMAP, so be sure that you've gone and checked the status of your application in GMAP. We also had some information about stakeholder engagement strategies. We have a new feature to our newsletters called a Principal's Perspective, and these are articles that are really geared specifically towards Title I school principals. And this month, our Principal's Perspective article is all about field trips with Title I funds. We had a welcome announcement for Kristen Montgomery, our new consultant who's joined the Division of School and Program Improvement, working with Title I Part A and Title I Part C. And then we had our standard recurring articles that are included every month, the open Title I Part A projects and all the associated deadlines that we just looked at, as well as the activities for April from the Coordinator's Year at a Glance. So if you're not subscribed to the newsletter, you can do that directly on the newsletter itself. You can also reach out to me and I'll add you to that list. I can also add other people at the district who may be involved with Title I or building principals. Just let me know and I will get them added. So moving on to our main topic for today, and that's parent and family engagement policies and compacts. Now, we've taken several in-depth looks at these documents in previous webinars and in newsletters. So as far as the requirements are concerned, I'm not going to get too far into the weeds. So just to summarize, we know that these documents need to be developed jointly with, agreed on with, and distributed to parents of participating children. And we've mentioned this in previous webinars. These are meant to be developed with the parents of the students who are currently participating in your district or your school's Title I program. So if you're using a policy or a compact that was created by another district or another school, that means it was not created with the parents of the children in your district or your school, and that's going to be an issue. We also need to make sure that these documents are written in a format and language that parents can understand. Things to consider would be avoiding excessive technical language and jargon that may be unfamiliar to individuals outside of the education field. And of course, considering how the documents can be made available in a language other than English as needed. Now, this might involve actually having the documents translated and having a physical copy of that document that you can share with parents, or being able to arrange for an interpreter who could orally interpret that into a different language. The document should also be evaluated for effective implementation, as well as regularly reviewed and then revised as needed. So what's the difference between a policy and a compact? We actually have two different policies, one for districts and one for schools. So we'll start with the district policy. This is required under ESSA 1116A2. And this policy establishes expectations and objectives for meaningful parent and family engagement. And it also describes how the district will meet those expectations and objectives. And it's that how component that we always like to emphasize. Similarly, the school parent and family engagement policy, which is required in section 1116B of ESSA, This describes the means for carrying out all of the requirements for the schools that are outlined in ESSA 1116C through F. Then the school family compact, this is only required at the school level, and it's required under 1116D. This outlines how parents, the entire school staff, and students all share responsibilities for improved student academic achievement, and the means by which the school and the parents are going to work together to build and develop a partnership to help the children achieve the state's high standards. So it's going to outline the responsibilities for those different parties. I do want to point out that some schools opt to include the compact within the policy just as one joint document. Others prefer to have two separate documents for this. Both of those options are allowable. The important thing is that you make sure that the required contents of both of those are included. I've mentioned in previous webinars that parent and family engagement policies and compacts are fairly common findings during our monitoring visits. So on this slide, I've just summarized some of the most typical issues that we see. First up is required information being missing. Another very common issue is that the policy lists the program requirements. It says the district or school will do whatever the requirement is, but it doesn't include those details on how the district or school is going to do it. And ESSA does specify that these are supposed to describe how. Sometimes we don't see any evidence that the documents were developed jointly with parents. We don't see any feedback surveys where parents had the opportunity to provide feedback or invitations to meetings, meeting minutes, things like that. Sometimes we don't see any evidence that the activities that are described in the policy are actually taking place. Sometimes we have compacts that do not include the space for stakeholder signatures, and that's required by KDE. That's not in ESSA, but it is required for schools in Kentucky. And then the last common finding is the documents not being reviewed and revised as needed on a regular basis. So I'm very excited to share that we have 5 new resources related to these policies and compacts that are going to be available on our Title I Part A Documents and Resources website. I am going to be sending out an email to all the district coordinators with the attached files, as well as a link to this recording. So be sure to share those templates and the webinar with your Title I school principals as well. And I will also include a timestamp for the webinar so you can tell the principals exactly what point in the webinar they can skip ahead to get the information they need. So a quick overview of these new resources that are going to be available. We have a district parent and family engagement policy template. We have 2 school policy templates. We've got one for elementary schools and then one for our secondary or our middle and high Title I schools. We have 1 school family compact template, and then we have a frequently asked questions document just about policies and compacts in general, as well as these new templates. Now, districts and schools are not required to use these templates that are being provided by KDE. But as I mentioned, these documents not meeting ESSA requirements are some of the most common findings that we see during monitoring. And that's the whole reason why we developed these templates. So although you aren't required to use them, we feel that doing so will really help ensure that all of the required information is included. And if you're selected for monitoring, hopefully these will help you avoid monitoring findings. So rather than summarizing the contents of each of these documents on the slides, I think it's going to be more beneficial for me to actually pull up the documents and just walk you through each of them. So we will switch our view right now. We're going to start with the district policy. Here we go. So these are all going to be uploaded as Word documents. That means that they're going to be fully customizable. So feel free to take this text and put it on your district or school letterhead. You can change the font, you can add a logo, anything like that. Now you'll see at the top of each template, we do have some instructions for the district or school, and we've put those in italics to kind of set them apart from the rest of the text. Now, this language does not need to be included on the final version of the policy or the compact, so you can just delete that. Each template is going to have a mixture of what I'm going to call just plain text and then some text that has been highlighted in yellow and placed inside brackets. The plain text outlines and summarizes each of the ESSA requirements and should not be removed unless it's been specified in the template that it can be removed. And we're going to see an example of that in a minute. Now, all of the fields that are in the brackets and highlighted in yellow, those are the fields that the district or the school needs to customize as they're working to create this document with parents. Of course, you can remove the highlights and the brackets from the final document as well. So first, we're going to look at the district policy, and the district policy does have fewer requirements than the school policy. Of course, there is space to include the district name and the school year, and then just a very brief introductory paragraph with the purpose of the district parent and family engagement policy. This template is divided into 6 sections, each one with individual requirements, and these align with the requirements in ESSA. So if we look at the first requirement in the first section, we see this requirement language here: involve parents in jointly developing and agreeing on the district parent and family engagement policy. And then we see the instructions in yellow: describe the specific actions the district will take to involve parents in developing the policy. So what you'll do is you'll replace this yellow highlighted text with either a few sentences or even a couple bullet points describing how your district does this. So maybe you use a survey to get feedback. Maybe you invite parents to a meeting to discuss. Those are just a couple of common examples of ways to involve parents. Okay, scrolling on, you can see that the other sections are set up similarly. And I want to point out item number 1 in section 4, involving parents at the school level. So the requirement says, involve parents in the activities of the schools served under Title I. And then you can see that there's some information in brackets, and it talks about this may include establishing a parent advisory board. And we went ahead and we added some italics here because that does come directly from ESSA, but it's just given as an example of one possible way to meet this requirement. You're not required to establish a parent advisory board. So if you don't plan to do that, you can delete this part that's in the brackets. You still need to leave this involve parents in the activities of the schools, and you still need to complete the highlighted portion, but that section about the advisory boards can be removed. And then at the bottom, we have a section for policy review and revision. And this just has kind of an assertion that you will work with parents to review and revise these documents, add any details on how you're going to do that. And then there's a space for the date that the policy was last reviewed or revised. That is a KDE recommended best practice, and it just helps demonstrate that the policy is in fact being regularly reviewed and revised as needed. We're going to switch now to the school policy. And I mentioned before that we have 2 school templates. One is for elementary schools and one is for our secondary or our middle and high schools. Now they are almost identical, but the elementary template has one additional piece of required information from ESSA that is not included on the secondary template. So I'm going to point that out in a minute, but when you share these with principals, make sure that they are using the appropriate template for their school. So right away, you can see this looks very similar to the district policy template. And we're going to jump down to section 2, which is shared responsibilities for high student academic achievement. And this is the section where the school is going to describe how it works to develop a compact with parents. So let's look at part B of number 1, talking about the importance of communication between teachers and parents on an ongoing basis. And this very first item mentions parent-teacher conferences and discussing the compact as it relates to the individual child's achievement at least one of those parent-teacher conferences. This is the part that isn't included on the secondary school template because ESSA only requires this at the elementary level, so our K-5 schools. The last part of the school policy that I want to look at is section 3, building capacity for involvement. This is where you're going to talk about a lot of the events and activities that you're going to be providing for parents. So this is the lengthiest section, and it's actually split into 2 parts. So in the first section, we can see up at the top, there's a space to enter the school name, and then we see the word must in bold, followed by a list of 5 items that the school is required to do. So this part of section 3 must be completed. Now below number 5, we see there's a little break here, another place to enter the school name. And then we have the word may in bold. The word may indicates that these items are not required. So then we see items 6 through 14. These are just some suggested ways that the school can support parent and family engagement. So we've included instructions here about you being able to delete any or all of these items that don't apply to your school. Now, if you do choose to keep any of these, you can add your specific descriptions down here below the list. And we've also added a little reminder about social and entertainment activities. Remember, those should not be paid for with Title I funds because they don't meet the intent and purpose of Title I parent and family engagement. So we just really want to get in the habit of keeping all of our activities like parties and dances and festivals and carnivals and things like that. We want to keep those separate from the activities that we consider Title I parent and family engagement activities. You still have those activities and they're very fun, but they're not Title I parent activities, so they don't need to be included in the policy. And then you can see the rest is, again, very similar to the district one. Similarly, there's the space at the bottom to add the date of review and revision. So we'll move on to our school compact template. As I mentioned before, there's only one compact template for all schools, and it's pretty straightforward. We've got the introductory paragraph, of course, and then we just have space for you to list the responsibilities of the school, the parent and family, and the student. Up at the top in the instruction section, we also have a link to our effective compact checklist, and that contains a lot of best practices that you might consider including in your compact if you'd like. I do want to point out a couple of ways you can further customize this. Some schools choose to break up the school responsibility section a little further. They separate that out into the teacher responsibilities and the principal responsibilities. That's not required, but it is something that we've seen before. Others choose to group student responsibilities by age ranges, such as primary versus intermediate at the elementary level. This could be especially beneficial for our schools who serve grades K-8 or even K-12. If you think about it, the responsibilities for a kindergartner are going to be very different from the responsibilities for a teenager, so you might want to separate that out a little bit. And then, as I mentioned, KDE does require signatures of the stakeholders, so we've included space for signatures here at the below. And again, that date that the document was last reviewed and or revised. So the last document that I'll share with you is our frequently asked questions document. And I've covered most of this already in this recording, so I'm just going to run through it quickly. First up, we have a section with some general questions. Who's required to have these policies and compacts? There's 2 different types of policies. Are the requirements exactly the same? We have some information for our districts that are single school districts or districts serving only one school with Title I funds. I do want to highlight this question number 5. This came up in our live broadcast of this webinar. Are participating private schools required to have parent and family engagement policies and school family compacts? And the answer is no. We have received recent confirmation from the U.S. Department of Education on that. So that may be an update from something that you had heard previously, but no, these are not required at the private schools. Got a question about who should be involved in developing and writing the policy and compact. And of course, we know that's meant to be done jointly between the district or school and the parents. And we've got some information, suggestions on how you can do that. Suggestions if you don't receive any feedback from parents, and a question on when and how the policies and compacts should be made available to parents. And again, these are just some different suggestions and best practices that we've seen over the years. The next section includes information on actually using the templates. First of all, are you required to use them? We know that answer is no. Specifying which templates need to be used by the district and by the school, elementary versus secondary. Quick walkthrough of how the templates are used with a screenshot. A question about any sections being able to be removed or left blank, and we've broken that down into the individual documents themselves. And then a question about, can we change the formatting, the font, and things like that? And we know that the answer to that is yes. So even if you choose not to use the templates that are being provided by KDE, this document is a good resource in general, just telling you about policies and compacts and things that you're going to want to consider when you are developing those documents. So now we will go back to our PowerPoint. We have just a couple more things to share. All right. The last thing I want to talk about is that reviewing and revising the policies and compacts. So we've already said several times during this webinar, these documents should be reviewed on a regular basis and then revised as needed. You probably won't have revisions every year. You certainly won't have major revisions every single year. And I showed you that space at the bottom of each template when you can add that date of the last review as well as the last revision. So even if you choose not to use these templates, we do strongly encourage you to include that information on your documents. We consider that to be a best practice. I want to point out that ESSA does not specify the frequency of review or the time of year when that review should occur. Even though it doesn't say you must review these annually or every X number of years, we recommend you not go more than a couple of years without reviewing these. If you think about it, once a few years have passed, your school parent population has changed, possibly dramatically. You could potentially have a large number of parents or even the majority of parents in the school who were not there the last time these were looked at and actually had no input on whether or not things were included or removed. I also want to remind you that even if all of your recent feedback has been positive and nobody's requested any changes or anything for these documents, it is important to still provide parents with that opportunity to have their voices heard. So when we think about how frequently this should occur, when it should occur, you need to consider what works best for your parent population. It could be different from school to school and district to district. You may consider asking for feedback and suggested revisions when you're sharing these documents during that Title I annual meeting at the schools. If the annual meeting is paired with a highly attended event, such as an open house or a back to school night, it increases the number of parents and guardians who have the opportunity to learn about the Title I program. And if you share these documents, then it increases the number of parents who have the opportunity to provide feedback on these documents. And we do recommend pairing that annual meeting with a highly attended event for that purpose. Now, however, the beginning of the school year is a very busy time. So some schools and their particular parent population may feel that it is already too busy. They don't want to add one more thing to everybody's plate. So you may want to wait to obtain feedback until the late winter or early spring. This gives parents the opportunity to kind of reflect on these documents and how they've been used throughout the year and how effective they were. Another benefit of waiting until later in the year is that there's probably a little bit less going on. People are a little bit less busy. Making reviews or doing reviews and making revisions near the end of the school year also helps ensure that the documents are ready to be shared with parents at the very beginning of the next school year. The last suggestion I have is consider adding Another opportunity to provide feedback during parent-teacher conferences. So I've mentioned that requirement to discuss the compact as it relates to individual student achievement during at least one parent-teacher conference for elementary schools. This can be a really natural time to gather some more feedback on this. So simply saying to the parent, while you're here and we're looking at this compact, is there anything jumping out at you that you think needs to be changed or added or removed or whatever? What would make this document more effective for you? So you could easily just jot that down during the conference, and then that feedback can be combined with any feedback that's received through those more formal methods, the meetings, the surveys, and things like that. And I do have a recent example of this from a monitoring visit that I was on. One school mentioned this happening during a conference, and what happened was that their compact had a responsibility for parents to monitor the amount of time that the child was watching TV. And that's a fairly common thing that you'll see on a lot of compacts. And during this conference, the parents said, you know, kids don't really watch TV like they used to. They are on their devices doing things, but it's not necessarily TV time. So maybe we should change that to parents should monitor screen time, or parents should monitor time spent on devices. And the school was able to take that parent's feedback and incorporate it into the next revision of the document. And that just made it more useful for parents and more relatable to the current situation. So whenever you decide to review and revise your documents, you now have all of these new resources to help guide you through the process, as well as our existing policy and compact checklists that are available on the webpage. Those aren't going anywhere. So I think what I personally would do if I was just receiving these templates, I would probably open up my current policy or compact and then the template side by side on my computers. And I would just look and see what could be moved from one document to the other. So for example, I could say, oh, this relates to building capacity. I'm going to put that as a bullet point here. This goes with shared responsibilities. I'll put that here. And so as I work through that, that's going to allow me to easily identify any area or areas where maybe I have some missing information that I need to go back and add with my parents. Of course, again, if you have any questions about this, you can send those to me via email. You can also always ask your assigned Title I consultant as well. And I want to remind everyone to mark their calendars for our future webinars. Our next webinar is Thursday, May 30th at 10 a.m. Eastern. And then we have the rest of the webinar schedule for 2024 listed there on the right as well. I also want to remind you about that Title I monthly webinar feedback survey. We like to get your feedback on what you find useful and helpful and what you want to see more of or what you want to see less of. So any comments or ideas or suggestions for webinars or newsletters can be submitted through that anonymous feedback survey. You can also submit those directly to me or your consultant as well, but if you'd like them to be anonymous, you can just use this survey. We have a link on the PowerPoint. We also always keep a link to that in our Title I newsletters. I do like to remind you not to submit questions about the actual webinar content through that survey, because again, it is anonymous, so I don't know who to send an answer to if you send a question through the survey. And I did go and look at these every month. I did notice we had several submissions after last month's webinar, so thank you to everyone who provided us with feedback. And we did have one request for a future topic, some information on a simple process for inventory. So I wanted you to know that I've added that to the topic list, and I'm going to be working on incorporating that into a future webinar. So with that, thank you for joining for this recording of the April Title I webinar, and we will see you next time.